Crichton's talk reminded me of not so many years ago when I myself was Director of Postgraduate Studies in my own department in Durham, and was dealing with all these different things that you needed to address when trying to attract more and more students to come to your master's degrees, and I had a bit of a flashback during that talk. But today I've been asked to talk about, basically from a government perspective, looking a little bit at the master's degree. And actually Siggy had asked me to talk about master's degrees in Iceland, but I thought it was such a boring subject that I decided to change it without telling him, but there you go. That's how it goes. It's a real pleasure to be here, actually, and I'm really pleased that we can have this conference together, all of us, in 3 dimensions, as I said to somebody I hadn't seen for quite a while. And that we can talk about all these issues together, and that we can have a good, fruitful discussion in person, although of course it's being sent out as well at the same time. But it did remind me that the last time we had one of these meetings, I was also here talking, so it makes me think of what Crichton was saying earlier about what happens when you're reliant on one member of staff, perhaps a little bit too much, that the problem exists also in government as it does in higher education institutions. Now, just to put in context basically what you were saying earlier, I mean, we've had a massive proliferation of master's provision in this country. And a lot of it comes from exactly what you were saying earlier, that employers and for professional recognition, you now require master's degrees. So for example, teaching, if you're a teacher, you now, even if you're a kindergarten teacher, you now need a master's degree in Iceland. But also, if you want to get employed as whatever, you know, a biologist or whatever, you need that master's level provision in order to be employable. So, I mean, there's a good reason for that. But there's also that need that you came in on earlier, which was about reskilling and upskilling and lifelong learning. That in higher education, we need to have the possibility for people with higher education degrees or qualifications to be able to come back and to easily reskill or upskill or continue their learning. So I think sometimes we could do better in thinking about how do we take a degree in one discipline and transform ourselves as higher education sort of graduates in a different discipline. We could possibly, I think, do more of looking at our master's degrees that way and the possibilities that they offer. I think, in general, there's quite a lot of duplication often in our master's degrees. And I think this is not an Icelandic problem, but for a country that's so small, where you only have 350,000 people, but you somehow manage to have 7 higher education institutions, this could be a problem, because you might want to see that you focus your provision better. So maybe we should look at that a bit more. And I think, although it is improving, that sadly there has been very little collaboration between institutions or internationally on the provision of master's degrees and qualifications at the master level. So I think we could do more, and there is more being done. I mean, there is now, through, for example, the European Universities Networks that both the University of Iceland and the University of Reykjavik are participating in. We know that there's it's being explored how best to do international degrees. And we also know that there is collaboration between, I mean, for example, the University of Reykjavik and the University in Akureyri on the provision of particular programs. So things are improving, but I think we have, it's a bit of a, what should I say, a bit of a jungle out there. If you're trying to, if you want to go and get a master's education in a new field, or not just continuing the education you've already got, then it is a bit of a jungle to try to get through and to try to understand where you're going. Now, what I really wanted to talk about, though, is that whatever we do here, and I think this is why we should never have a talk like this about the second cycle in Iceland, is that it doesn't matter really, you know, what we do. The policy of higher education is a European-based international policy. We shouldn't be trying to develop a special Icelandic policy on higher education, because for our students and for our employers, it's important that exactly this, that we belong to a much bigger world, that we belong to the European higher education area, and the European higher education area, and to some degree now also the new European education area, sets us particular standards that we want to keep, but also allows us to accept students across borders. They should be able to travel across borders, and our degrees should be accepted across borders as well. So whatever we choose to do in Iceland, we need to make sure that our students will be able to use those qualifications to travel, to take them to be recognised somewhere else, at least within the European higher education area, but often even beyond, and that really the employers in Iceland should be able to accept degrees that come from those areas the same as they should be able to accept degrees that come from here. So it's very, very important that we always remember that Icelandic policy in higher education never exists in isolation. It is always a part of a pan-European policy, and that we're travelling together in order to make sure that all of our students get the best out of their qualifications that they can. So, with that, I wanted to, this is a sort of, can you spot the problem, sort of a slide. Here you will note that these are the qualifications framework in Iceland for the second cycle. On the one hand is the Icelandic framework, and on the other is the EHEA framework. And you will note that according to the EHEA, in general, no qualifications at the master level should be with fewer than 90 ECTS. Really, you should, as somebody said when I phoned them up at Eurydice the other day, they said anything below 90 ECTS is not a qualification. If you think it's a qualification, you've misunderstood what a qualification is. Because you need to be able to put together different types of information, different types of courses in order to form the whole of a qualification. That doesn't mean that you can't do smaller units of learning. It just means that for a qualification, this is where you should be. So we have a problem here, that the qualification framework that we've been working from, which in itself was really just trying to fit the system we had into an EHEA framework, doesn't really match standards. And that means that the students who graduate with these qualifications that are this small will not get them recognised abroad, will not get them recognised by employers. And that is a big problem for us, because we do not want to offer learning that is not recognised across Europe. That's a big issue. So, I don't know if you can read this, but if you don't, then I can read it to you. This is the last of the EHEA communique, so basically the things that the ministers sign up to, that they promise to do, or that they are committed to doing in policy making in European higher education. And this is just a bit of a section. And it says that we need flexible and open learning paths. We need those smaller units of learning. We need to enable learners to develop and update their skills. And we need to explore how on earth we can do that within the qualification framework that we have. And at the same time, we need to make sure that we update our qualification framework so that it actually is fit for purpose, that it actually works for our students and it works for our employers. So, and only then, if we actually do that and we keep working together to do these things together, can we actually get where we want to be, which is here, with automatic recognition, which is where we're trying to aim to be at some point in the future. It's a fast, what should I say, fast-moving target, moving away from us, always faster, it seems to be at the moment, but we're trying to catch up with it. So, with that in mind, we're now doing some changes to the second cycle. I'm a bit of a square person. I would have loved to have gone to 60 ECTS as a minimum, but I think politically it is not possible. So we're making changes for 60 ECTS as a minimum level for a qualification at level 2. I note that it's still outside the Bologna range. There's quite a long way to go, and so we're also encouraging institutions to focus their provision of qualifications, nota bene, on the 90+ ECTS programs. And I should say that provision of qualifications under 60 ECTS, as far as I can see, and I've done quite a lot of trawling, is only offered in the UK. I can't find it anywhere else that you have actually got qualifications that are put down as such that are smaller than 60 ECTS. Now, I want to put this into context because we put these changes out for review, and one of the things that came back strongest, and actually it was mostly from one institution, was the issue of micro-credentials. Because what we in government said is we would like the institutions to consider taking these smaller units of learning that now are called something like additional diplomas, etc., which are very, very valuable bits of learning. Very, very good courses. They're really important for exactly what I was emphasizing earlier, the reskilling, the upskilling, the continuous lifelong learning, and put them into the context of micro-credentials. And quite a lot of the feedback said, well, you can't use the word micro, because micro means that you're making something smaller. We're used to talking about higher education. We do not want something small and lessen the impact of our education. But indeed, the micro-credentials are the flagship. I think André will just about agree with me. One of the flagships of European development and policy in higher education at the moment. And we have, at the EU level, this initiative of micro-credentials was introduced in the European Skills Agenda, so it's there as something that we're aiming towards in order to use, to basically be able to reskill our workforce. In the European education area, in that communication that from September 2020, there is the call for all the necessary steps for micro-credentials to be in place by 2025 in Europe. And in December, last December, there was a proposal put forward for a council recommendation on a European approach for micro-credentials. And I just checked in the EU this morning. I phoned up this morning to check where is this going with this proposal, and they said, well, it's almost finished. We will have a council recommendation soon. So it's definitely moving in that direction, and we need to move with it. And the reason that I think this is important, and the reason I think it's important that we take the qualifications that we call such, that we offer at the moment, in shorter units and put them into this framework, is exactly this. Micro-credential is basically, has approved documents with it that is standardized according to a European framework, including quality assurance. So we know that these learning outcomes, these particular ECTS that you achieve in this particular way, will be recognized across the whole of the European higher education area. That is the aim of the European education area, it's the aim of the European higher education area, and it's the aim of the European Skills Agenda. That means that those students who previously had the diplomas with 30 ECTS that they would not get recognized by employers elsewhere can take those same bits of learning, put into this particular framework, and have them recognized and use them. And I think that's really, really important, and we need to make sure that we get our heads around micro-credentials, because to be honest, I thought it was a bit of fluff when I first heard about it, but it's actually a very, very important way of moving forward. Now, I'm going to very briefly say what we're doing in the ministry at the moment that relates to the master's level. We're working on these changes to allow better recognition across borders, so basically, and we're making some other changes to the qualification framework as well, elsewhere at other levels, but this is mainly what we're doing there. We're also working on recognition of prior learning. We originally participated in an international program on recognition of prior learning that was led by Sweden, that ran out last year, and we're now involved with many of the same countries through an Austrian-led initiative. And there what we're working towards in the ministry is to aim to set up a standardized approach across the institution of recognition of prior learning. So that the person does not need to have the prior learning assessed in one place, and then again in the other institution if they move on, or etc. That we have national networks of practitioners of recognition of prior learning so they can help each other. And also, as part of our presidency in the Nordic Council of Ministers, we are going to try to work on removing barriers for recognition of these types of ECTS credits across borders, if there are any, because sometimes they do exist. And also, of course, there's the review that Crichton mentioned, and actually the focus areas here that I'll put down, which are not the same as Crichton said, but basically they come from the issues that have arisen during quality assurance through the last 2 framework exercises. How good is the second cycle as a unique level within our higher education system? Is there far too much overlap with other levels? And the independence of these types of qualifications, i.e., is there too much, are we trying to sell the same course? I was thinking about this when I saw Crichton's list of Vikings and history and whatever, with just a minimal change in the research project or a minimal change in one unit that you take, and rebranding it as something else in order to try to attract new students. And is that something that one would like or not like? I mean, it's a policy issue. So I think I'll finish there. You can have a lovely picture of us meeting, which I've taken specifically trying to aim, I was trying not to aim at any particular building, but there you go, it still seems to go the same way. But it's meant to illustrate that you have bridges that go out everywhere and anywhere across this particular area. And what we really need to make sure is that the bridges are working and that we actually can go across them and get to where we want to go. So I think that's enough for now. And thank you very much for listening.